Now that we know how to make basic motion tweens, let's take a closer look at some ways we can modify and control them so that we can make our animated objects move exactly as we want. We're going to see some new ways to modify the paths and animate some special effects, as well as find out how to get more realism into our scenes. Our project for this chapter is to come up with some sports animations for the TV news ads, and this one is going to be golf. So let's get things started by just making a new file. I'll do that up in the File menu. We'll just choose New and pick out an ActionScript 3 document. Let's check our document settings first. I'm okay with the Flash player and the ActionScript, but I'm going to change the size to match the other files that we were working on. I'll just set the height to 300 pixels. And that way we can see our stage a little bit better in the recording screen. Let's also go ahead and save our file right here at the beginning. I'll just go up to File, choose Save, and we'll save it right into our Chapter 4 folder. Go to the project files on my desktop, drop it into Chapter 4, and I'll save it as Golf. Now we're going to be doing a little golf animation, and what we're going to do is a close-up of the hole on the putting green. We'll need a background, but instead of using just a solid color for the background, why don't we set up the green here? I'll just go up to my first layer and rename it green. And we'll just use our rectangle tool, and I'll drag out a rectangle that's just a little bit bigger than the stage. Next we can set up our green. I'll just switch over to my normal selection tool. I can double click to select the outline and then just hit delete to get rid of any stroke that we might have drawn. And for the fill shape, let's go over to the color panel and switch it from solid color to a nice linear gradient. We can set the start color for our linear gradient up to kind of a nice light green. Let me see, something right about in there, and I'll just pick out something on the lighter end of the shades. And for the opposite end of my color ramp, I'm going to go and select a very dark green, so I'll drop it right into the green shades again, but we'll pick something out maybe down at that end. Now that looks nice already, but if we change around our settings for our gradient, we'll get a little bit better look. Now remember, we have our gradient transform tool up here underneath the free transform tool. And when we get the handles here, I'm just going to zoom out one step here to 50% so we can see what's going on. And I will set it up so that we've got a little angle kind of coming back here. And that way we start with our dark color in the corner and go towards light. If I click away, that kind of gives us a little 3D look to our green. Next, we're going to need a hole for our ball to drop into. So let's go ahead and make that. I'm just going to switch over to my oval tool here. Now, just so we can see it easier, I'm going to change the fill color here to nothing. And that way we'll only draw a stroke. And we'll just go right over here, maybe in the lower corner there. And I'll just drag out a nice hole. We'll use an oval so we get a little bit of depth out of it. And as we know, working in merge mode, if I've got a fill with a stroke on top of it, I should actually be able to just go in and remove that section of the green. You can see that I can click on it here, and the ovals cut the original piece apart. I'll just hit the delete key now, and we've got a hole. Now I want this to look 3D as well, so let me take that stroke that we've got left over, and let's move it to another layer. We can do that just by double-clicking and selecting the stroke. And I'll just cut that from the layer up here in the Edit menu using the Cut command. Now we just need to make a new layer, and we'll call that one the hole. So I'll double-click the text. And of course, I'm going to click on that keyframe. We're going to go over and we're going to use Paste in Place, and that'll put it right back where we picked it up from the other layer. But now, of course, it's in our new layer. Now to make that really look like a hole in the ground, let's use a gradient in there as well. I'm just going to go over and choose my Paint Bucket tool, and I'm going to select a black-white gradient off of the swatch palette here at the bottom. Let's zoom back in just a little bit here, and we'll use our Paint Bucket to dump the gradient right into the hole. Now that doesn't look too bad. My light source seems to be over here, and it would be illuminating the back edge of the hole, but it looks a little bit too dark. So let's just switch over to our selection tool, and we'll select that gradient. And then over my color panel, I can modify the colors. Now here's a great trick. I'm going to click right next to the white to add another color chip, which is a very light gray, and then I'm just going to drag that color chip over to the middle. Now we can kind of see that we get a really bright highlight, and it almost looks like the shadow dropping right down on the back side of the hole. So maybe just a tiny bit more. There we go, and that kind of lines up with the angle of the sun. And then just for a little bit more realism, let's grab a hold of the stroke that we have around the edge, and I'm just going to pull it down a little bit. Now what that's going to effectively do is cut my fill in half, so we now have another fill up here at the top. And just so it looks like we have a little grass edge there, let's just change that part of the gradient to be a little bit of a brown color. I'll just pick that white color that we were working with before, and let's see if we can just put a little brown into it right down here in the orange ranges, and then kind of dropping back there. So there you can see we got some brown, and we'll do the same thing to this mid color here. I'll kind of pull it down into this zone here and make sure that it's got kind of that brown tone, and there we kind of see the grass edge. Now we don't really need this line anymore, it's done its job, so I'm going to double click it, I'll hit delete, and there we've got our hole, and we can use a similar technique to put a little pin in it so that we've got the flag there. I'm just going to switch over to my rectangle tool, and while we're at it, I'm going to change the fill to a white to black gradient using the swatch down here in the color selection panel. And then we need to add a layer for our pin. As usual, we're going to name our layers and press enter. And then with my rectangle tool, I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to drag out a really skinny rectangle. I want it to be tall enough that it's going to go right off the stage, so that looks about good right there. Now I've got an outline around it that we don't need, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'll just use my selection tool and double click right on the outline. That grabs all the pieces. We'll hit the delete key. And just to make sure that my light direction is working properly, let me click on that, and I'm going to go to my normal transform tool here and just flip it over the other direction. You can hold down shift and it'll go to exactly 180 degrees and snap to that point. Now that kind of looks like a post that's sticking up into the air. I will just pull that on up over and drop it right into the area where it looks like it's coming right out of the hole. Last but not least, we need a golf ball. So let's make one more layer. I'll call that one golf ball. And we can make one pretty quickly with our oval tool. I want a perfect circle, so I'm going to hold down shift as I draw, and you can see that it drops right into a circle shape. That's probably about big enough for a golf ball right there. Now, let's set up our golf ball so it looks a little bit more 3D like the rest of our scene. First of all, I don't really need the outline, so I'm just going to double click and hit delete. And second of all, let's use a radial gradient instead of this linear one. I'll just select that fill shape. We'll go over to color and we'll set it up. I'll choose radial gradient from the menu, and I don't think we really need quite so many chips, so I'm going to pull this middle one down from our last gradient that we were using. You can see that deletes it from the ramp. And I want the ball to be white, so I'm going to take the center point here and I'm just going to double click on that chip so I can choose white from my color swatches. And for the other end, we don't want it quite so dark. I'm going to bring that up a level just by dragging up here to a lighter gray. That way we get a shadow behind the ball, but not quite something so heavy. Last but not least, let's change our gradient settings. I'm going to go to my gradient transform tool, and what I'll do is pull the gradient so that it's off center a little bit. Again, we've kind of got our light source up here at the top. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then we can use these tools. Now you might want to zoom in on it just to get another look, but the center one here is a scaling tool. And you can see that that's making my radial gradient just a little bit bigger. I want to be able to just see the edge of the darkness right on the back of the ball. And now our scene is actually looking pretty good.